Thank you. Good morning. It's a great pleasure and great opportunity to speak here at HIMSS, which is not a critical care conference. So for me, it's absolutely great. And I realize that as we are going to discuss how we can use clinical data, big data analytics, and artificial intelligence in the intensive care unit, I realize that many of you may actually not know what an ICU is. It's the place where we basically fight to save lives. Okay, we take care of critically ill patients night and day, and that's the type of image you see on TV. That doesn't actually fully explain what intensive care medicine is. And when my Jewish mother asked me, "What do you do for a living?" She doesn't know. You see how much I'm in trouble. I say, intensive care medicine, it's exactly like Formula One. It's fast. Everything happens quickly in the ICU. It's dangerous. I would say 1 out of 4 or 5 patients is not going to make it. It's quite expensive. We use up to 30% of the hospital expenses. And obviously, there's a lot of technology involved in it. But I would say, first and foremost, it's about teamwork. It's probably teamwork at its best. And this is really something really important today when we consider what we do in the ICU. And we try to deliver ICU care in what I call the triple challenge context, and you're all familiar with it. You all know that there's an increase in healthcare needs as the population is aging with more comorbidities. I think that's true globally. You may not actually realize what it means. It means that we are going to see roughly 13 to 20 million patients on mechanical ventilation each year, with up to 6 million patients with pneumonia. Flu, for instance, today kills patients in the ICU. We treat up to 27 or 29 million patients with sepsis, which is a word that maybe you're not familiar with. But sepsis kills 9 million patients a year. Every 4 seconds, someone dies of sepsis. And what it actually means for you and I is that we are going to be twice in our lifetime into an intensive care unit. And we expect this number to grow by 46% by 2030 if we have access to ICU care. And this is really something we are fighting for, because giving more access to ICU care in a context where there's a decrease in the resources is really a challenge. That's the second aspect of the triple challenge context. And the third one is about changing social values of the people we treat. Believe it or not, they don't want to die anymore. But also of the people that are treating them, the caregivers. And now I'm dealing every day with the millennials, what people call the MeMe generation. And I think it's a really important thing to realize when we are thinking about data. They are used to data, quick data. And we have to think about what actually is driving their behavior. It's not because they don't share the same value that we used to share that they don't have values. They have values. And one of the important values that they have today, they want to have a sense of purpose. They want to know why they are doing things. And we believe that it's really important because we can get them to concentrate on one thing. Realize that healthcare is a basic human need. And access to quality of healthcare is really something really important. And actually, people don't realize that there is significant practice variation. I could speak for hours about this. But just to make a long story short, if you compare the bottom 10% and the top 10% of US hospitals, mortality and incidence of adverse effects, they differ widely. I mean, if you want to look at the big picture and focus on things that are often in the headlines, mortality from acute myocardial infarction is twofold increased if you compare the top and the bottom 10%. More concern can come from the fact that you have an 18% increased risk of central venous catheter bloodstream infection. People don't know that. But this is, I would say, very concerning. And that all lead back to think, okay, how do we actually make decisions at the bedside? And when we make this decision at the bedside, we're supposed to consider the best available research evidence. So here we are at HIMSS. You like informatics, you like numbers, so I'm going to share one number with you. Think about that number for a couple seconds, 17. So let's imagine something really terrible happened in your life. You break your iPhone or your cell phone. How long are you going to wait until you get a new one? 17 hours, days, weeks? My son would be 17 minutes. But when your relative is in the ICU, then we are ready to wait for 17 years. 17 years for 14% of the research results to actually be implemented in clinical practice. And we said at the time, needed to change practice. Really? I mean, that's the time it took from the publication of this paper, 2000, that tells if you reduce the volume you inflate in the patient lung to 6 milliliter per kilogram, you save lives. Not that sophisticated, okay? And roughly 17 years later, huge study worldwide show that less than 18% of the patients are actually ventilated with 6 milliliter per kilogram tidal volume or less, and more than 35% are ventilated with a tidal volume greater than 8. That's a concern, you know. And I think we need to think that our job is about preventing death, diagnostic errors, and therapeutic harm. This is why we should fight every day. I mean, that comes from HIMSS study, actually, looking at the maturation level of a hospital in the US. I'm not talking only about the ICU. That show that if you're looking at the number of hospitals that were in stage 6 and 7, which is, again, not the thing we are all aiming for, very small number, and if you think about the market saturation, if we don't change anything, we'll reach 50% in 2027. It's urgent that we actually change something, and especially in the ICU, because in the ICU, if you connect all the technology that we have to a computer information management system, then you have the potential to collect up to 6,000, 8,000, 10,000 in some patients data points every single day. And you can use this data to change behavior, to change outcome, and actually to accelerate research. The first thing you can do is to change the way we implement care and actually define processes that will change this data into meaningful information that's helpful at the bedside. Couple examples. We are very good at scientific societies at, saying these are the things you should monitor. And when I was leading the European Society of Intensive Care Medicine, we define quality indicators. But how you actually monitor these quality indicators? We just don't. So the fact is you can actually use data today, and we've built a cloud-based system with 158 KPIs that we are using to try to improve the way we are using our resources, the way we ventilate patients, the way we treat and document infection, and so on and so on. And the good thing is that it's not for IT professionals. It's meant to be used by healthcare professionals. And with a couple of clicks, you can know exactly what's happening in your unit, what's the standardized mortality ratio in your unit, and you can actually define this condition by condition in some specific patient category and actually change the way you're treating patients. And I told you about the way you actually deal with mechanical ventilation in the unit. Yeah, that can be done as well. In our unit, these are real data. Our tidal volume is 5.99. Target was 6, not so bad. How did we get there? Have we been there all the time? No, not at all. I mean, when I checked what happened between October and November 2017, where we changed 15 out of the 17 doctors that were primarily responsible for patient care, We moved from 633 to 637 and so on. And I went back, we had the data for 3 years. So I looked at the data and I was kind of proud of what we have achieved, thinking maybe we have a system, until I looked at July 2017. And you'll see August 6.25 and July 904. What happened? In July, I was in India for a week for a congress and for 3 weeks on vacation. Could it be that they are just afraid of me? No, they don't have the data. Now that we are posting the data every 2 weeks in the ICU, in the recovery room, patients can see it. When it's good, it's green. When it's not so good, and it's not that bad as well, you know, it's orange. The system actually treats itself. And we wanted to test that with the foundation, because we believe that this, at the top of the Maslow pyramid, revised by my son, you know, no Wi-Fi, no life, can actually change behavior. And we've done what I call a proof of value study in 16 public hospitals in Brazil, where with the implementation of this satisfaction program, which is really data-driven changes in the way we care for patients, we've been able to see a change with a decrease in hospital mortality and standardized mortality ratio from 47.8% to 29% and from 1.46 to 0.69. That's one of the ways you can actually change how we care for patients. But obviously, you're here for more AI, for machine learning and so on. And you're all familiar with the hype cycle, the Gartner hype cycle that tells you that indeed, we are at the peak of the expectations with deep neural networks and things like that. When you hear about the success stories in AI, it's about radiology. A lot of it is about radiology. And I would say imaging by and large. Radiology, pathology, dermatology, ophthalmology. Can we go beyond imaging? That's really the thing we want to do. We also have our images in the ICU, by the way. Every time we ventilate a patient, we are recording waveforms, and detecting patient-ventilator asynchrony, which are important clinical events, is one of the tough things to do. That's accessible to AI with quite good sensibility and sensitivity. And when you actually look at 10 million breaths, which can be done only by a computer, then you can actually detect periods of high incidence of asynchrony that are associated with side effects such as hypoxemia, and that will predict where the patient is going to be next. That's the type of thing we want to do with AI and big data. We want to also foster, accelerate research. And that's really something that also is amenable to changes today. It's about moving from clinical intelligence, like the incidence of renal replacement therapy in the unit was 8% last year, to prescriptive analytics, where we say that this patient in bed number 5 has a higher risk of renal replacement therapy and renal failure, and that maybe we should intervene, because indeed we've measured that the risk, the slope of the risk, has increased. And when you're collecting 5,000, 6,000 data points in patients every day, you can actually develop this type of algorithm. It can also help us accelerate research, because this type of technology can help you fuse clinical work and clinical research. Today they live on 2 different planets, and that's a very sad event. You can use AI to improve and move from data to decisions. And for instance, in sepsis, I told you about sepsis. 1 patient dies every 4 seconds. We built a surviving sepsis campaign with guidelines and so on. And when you present guidelines to the doctors, you know what happens? They argue. They are going to argue and say, oh, you said that we need 30 milliliters per kilogram of crystalloid fluid infusion, but why 30? Is 30 better than 20? Do we have a study that shows that? Is 30 better than 40? We are doing the study every day. We are treating patients every day, and when you use machine learning with reinforcement learning, great paper from Mathieu Komorowski, you can actually see how much fluid patients receive, how much pressure they receive, and define the outcome. Survival is a good outcome, not surviving is a bad outcome. And using reinforcement learning, compare what the clinician has done to a typical AI policy that would help you find the best combination of vasopressors and fluids. And what do you find? You'll find that overall, we differ as compared to what the computer would tell us. Machine learning tells us that the patient actually are receiving more fluid than they should and less vasopressors. And again, it's significant. We are talking about patients that are receiving the suggested dose of fluid in only 36% of the times. And they will get vasopressor in only 17% of the time, when the AI algorithm clinician would tell you, do it in 30% of the time. Which basically tells us that we have to solve collectively the three challenges of data for machine learning and decision support, which are compartmentalization of data, corruption of data, garbage in, garbage out, and the complexity of the data. And that's the most important issue. And that's why I seriously contend that we need to make this happen together. It's not going to come only from computer scientists and from ICU physicians. It's by working together, and also by thinking that it's not because it's coming from a computer that it's good. So this science needs also to undergo what I call clinical validation in real-world medicine, but also publications and studies with the same rigor than the studies we've done in clinical patients, and that lead people to actually get FDA approval for drugs. The only way we are going to solve this triple challenge of improving the health of population, improving the patient experience, choosing the right treatment for the right patient, and at the same time reduce the cost of healthcare, is through collaboration. And big data will be part of the equation, AI will be part of the equation, but if there's not a real collaboration without any arrogance, we will never succeed. Thank you very much for your attention.